passage that we encounter this morning, as it relates to a lot of churches and the way that a lot of people were brought up thinking about what it means to become and to be a Christian, is just a great way for us to think about it. I think as we look around and we say things like, hey, is there a big professional sports game going on? Was there a big college game last night? Is the weather kind of rough? We say, hey, all of these things can kind of keep people home. And we look at this, and then we look at passages like this, and we see that what, on average, the person who claims to be a Christian has been taught what it means to follow Jesus, and what Jesus would say it means to follow him can many times be very, very different. We've heard, many of us, for a long, long time, that really all you have to do to become a Christian is to pray a prayer, right, and to be baptized, and then that's it. And that kind of sums up what it means. That's how you become a Christian, and then that's it. And we kind of put that in our back pocket, and we kind of just go on about the rest of our life. And we are never taught, many of us, hopefully you cannot say that here if you've been coming here with us, that coming to Jesus means it's going to cost you something. Dietrich Bonhoeffer actually wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. What does it mean for us to be a disciple? You know, there's a lot of people that want to be great at something. They want to be something. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be in the Army. I want to be a Navy SEAL. I want to be a mechanic. I want to be a zoologist, or whatever their wants are. And then this is what we know, that when it comes to actually pay the cost to become that, the average person is not willing to pay that cost. I was talking to someone about this. We were talking about wrestling. Wrestling season's coming up. We'll start here in just a couple weeks. And I said, and I have this discussion a lot, that what the difference between a good wrestler and a great wrestler is what they're willing to go through to be good or to be great. A good wrestler, they just come and they do the minimum and they get by with the minimum, and they'll win some matches and they'll be moderately successful, and then they'll go on about their life. Great wrestlers are just obsessed with greatness. Everything they do in their life is built towards that. And that's, I think, true with anyone who wants to be great at something. That there's a level there, and what distinguishes them between good and great is that they're willing to pay the cost that it takes to get there. Right? The difference between someone who is a Navy SEAL and not a Navy SEAL is not a desire to be something. It's the willingness to suffer to be something. To go through what it is required, to make the sacrifice to be it. And today we're going to look at a conversation, two short conversations that Jesus has with two individuals who are confused about the cost of what it takes to follow Jesus. If you will, jump right in here with me. Matthew chapter 8, just a handful of verses 18 through 22. And the Word of God says this: when Jesus saw a large crowd around him, he gave the order to go to the other side of the sea. A scribe approached him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus told him, "Foxes have dens, and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." "Lord," another of the disciples said, "first let me go bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." A couple of interesting things that we see going on here that many of you may not have you've realized, but maybe we don't know what it means. This phrase, he gave the order to go to the other side of the sea. That generally when things would get too crowded, Jesus would cross the Sea of Galilee. So what that oftentimes meant is if he was on the Jewish side and he crossed all the way over the sea, he was going to go to the Gentile side. If he was on the Gentile side and he crossed back over the Sea of Galilee, he was going back to the Jewish side. So it wasn't just he was getting away from the crowd, he was really, in effect, going to a completely different place. And he would do that a lot. We see that happen. He feeds the 5,000. They try to forcibly take him and make him the king of Israel. He gets in a boat and he goes across the Sea of Galilee. And then they come find him the next day. Jesus is kind of leaving one spot, going to another. Yes, partially to escape the crowd, right? But not solely to just get away from people. So as he's getting ready, they know that he's getting ready. He and his disciples are getting ready to load into a boat or boats likely and go across the Sea of Galilee. There are two men that approach him and they want to go with him. Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. A couple of things here that we know from this conversation. Number one, we know that following Jesus requires uncommon sacrifice. Now we know that this guy is clearly somewhat confused on what it takes to follow Jesus and to be identified with him, because it begins with him, instead of calling him Lord, he calls him teacher. Rabbi, I will follow you wherever you go. This would have been a common thing for people to do in that time and in that culture. When you committed yourself to following and learning from someone, you would follow them. That's how you learned from them. It was almost like kind of saying, hey, I want to be your apprentice. I want to follow you and learn from you. And then at some point you will release me out onto my own to do what you've trained me to do. And that's kind of what this guy is asking Jesus to do. Let me follow you. I want to go. I want to follow you around. I want to learn from you. I want to be associated with you. Remember, Jesus had done a lot. He had done all of this teaching on the mountainside. He had come down and he had done a bunch of miracles. And now he's getting ready to cross over the Sea of Galilee. And this guy says, I want a little bit more of what you got. I want to follow you wherever you go. And Jesus doesn't just say, hey, you know what, man, no big deal. Hop in the boat. There's room for more. There's always room for more. He says, foxes have dens and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. This man is a scribe. He was skilled. He was eager. We would think, if we look at this from our perspective, he's the perfect kind of person that we would want and that Jesus would want to follow him. And yet Jesus says, you follow me, in effect, I'm like a homeless guy. Everything else that exists has a place to lay its head down except for the Son of Man. I don't know where I'm going to be on any given day, and I don't know where I'm going to sleep on any given night. Despite this man's skill and eagerness, Jesus really tries to talk him out of following him. Now, why would this matter? Why wouldn't Jesus just say, hey, you know, because this is what we say, well, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. All it takes is a desire to follow Jesus. And here's what I'm going to tell you. There's a sense where that's true, but this verse says we need to be we need to be desiring the right thing. There are a lot of things in life that we desire that we're not willing to pay the cost to keep. For example, marriage. Lots of people want a marriage. I don't know anybody that I've counseled as a couple that is getting ready to get married, and they'll sit down in front of me and they'll say, Luke, you know what I really want? I want to be married for about 3 or 4 years, and then I want my marriage to fall apart, and I want us to be absolutely miserable together after the honeymoon wears off. I've never heard anybody tell me that in premarital counseling. In fact, if they did, I would say, okay, well, you know, if you guys still want to get married, you're going to have to find someone else to officiate, because I will not officiate this wedding if that's what you want out of it. Nobody wants to be unhappily married. Everybody that gets married wants to be happily married, right? Until it takes the time to pay the cost of what it is to stay happily married. I can promise you this, and I love my wife, and we've got a great marriage. There are times when she has to pay a cost to be married to someone like me. I know y'all will find this hard to believe. I'm not the easiest man at times to coexist with. I can be stubborn, right? I can be a little bit short-tempered. I can sometimes be a little bit short-worded and be rude, be hurtful. And though there are times when I can promise you that my wife has to say, it's not the fact that this man is lovable that keeps me in this relationship with him. It's the fact that I've made a commitment to love him for better or for worse, and we'll label this one as worse. And conversely, guess what? That's a two-way street. And it's hard sometimes. I was a senior in high school. It was spring semester. Me and my friend were getting ready to graduate. I had come over to visit him. I was going to spend the night at his house, and we were sitting in his living room. Something was on the TV I can't remember. And his dad, who's a Church of Christ minister, was talking to us. And obviously, like dads do, he was talking to us about girls and relationships and everything else. And he says, hey, you boys are getting ready to graduate. You're going to start thinking about getting married and finding a wife. He said, let me tell you, I'm going to tell you something that I tell everybody before I marry them. There's going to come a point in time in your marriage where you're going to wake up and that woman's going to be beside you and her hair is going to be messy and she's going to be snoring or drooling or passing gas or whatever else it is. You're going to be like, holy moly, I'm stuck with this lady for the rest of my life. And he said, that's when you find out whether you really want to be married or not. There's a cost to that. There's a cost to everything. And Jesus simply wants this man to count the cost. He doesn't want them to make the commitment to follow him without knowing what they're agreeing to. Right? He says, hey, look, you're never going to be able to say to me, in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the trial, in the midst of the trouble, this is not what I bargained for. When we're just going place to place to place, and we really never know where we're going to end up, and we really never know where we're going to stay, and we really sometimes never even know where our next meal is going to come from, you're not going to be able to say to me, hey, Jesus, you should have told me this is how it was going to be. He says, no, I want you to understand that following me requires an uncommon level of sacrifice. There are things that you do in your life that you're willing to sacrifice for. We understand this at a very basic level, right? Parents understand this better than anybody else. We sacrifice for people we love, right? There are dads and moms who will wear holy socks and holy underwear and holy jeans and everything else so that their kids can have something that's a little better. They're sacrificing for those people. We sacrifice sleep. We sacrifice time. We sacrifice the things that we would rather do. And I think it's very telling to us how many people arranged their schedule yesterday in such a way that nothing was going to interrupt the festivities of the third Saturday in October. Lots of people. Some people were so undisciplined and so committed that they probably had a little bit too much fun last night, and they were up maybe a little bit too late, and that's why they're not here this morning at 11:30. I had a good friend of mine who was a season ticket holder for the Titans for a long time. And I tell you what, on Sundays when the Titans were playing at home, he was not going to be at church. He had a sacrificial level of commitment to something. It just wasn't Jesus. You have the capacity for a sacrificial level of commitment. The question is not whether you're willing to sacrifice for something you love. The question is that thing Jesus? Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And he says, not unless you're willing to give up even the comforts of home. Yeah, I love to be able to go home at the end of the day and just sit in my chair and put my feet up and relax a little bit. And I'm sure that that's common for a lot of people, but would we be willing to give that up? To maybe travel to a different place where we didn't know, where maybe we didn't have those comforts, so that we might follow Jesus? I think the simple answer here is, for many of us, no. Jesus wants you to know that the commitment to follow him is not a commitment to luxury or to comfort. It's a commitment to sacrifice. And as I said, I want you to think about some of the ways that following Jesus is presented to people in churches today. It's not about sacrifice. It is about luxury. It is about comfort. It is about blessing. It is about, if you love God, he will bless you in return. If you give this to God, he'll give you 10 times that back in return. But here's the beautiful reality. Jesus says, the only thing you're going to get when you commit to following me is me. That's it. I want you to tell you right now, when you think about, I want to follow Jesus, think about this. Are you willing to give up everything else to follow him? I think another interesting dynamic here is we don't know how these men respond. Because we go immediately from one question and one person to another question and another person. And we can't confuse this conversation with Jesus' conversation with the rich young ruler. Remember, the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he says, Lord, what do I got to do to get to heaven? And he says, well, you got to follow the 10 Commandments. And he says, well, I've done all those. He says, okay, well then here's what you need to do. Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. And the Bible tells us in that interaction, and so the man went away sad. Because he couldn't have his things and Jesus at the same time. And so he chose his things. We get no such indication about what either of these men choose today. Because here's what I will tell you, right? The important thing that God wants us to know from this passage is not whether the men accepted the offer or not. It's that the offer was made and the expectation was set. And so the question is not, what did the scribe do? It's, what are you going to do? Are you willing to make the uncommon sacrifice that it requires to follow Jesus? We've been duped into thinking that it's no big deal to just pray a prayer and get dunked under some water and sign a card and put our name on a roll somewhere, and then that's it. We're good. We're safe from the penalty of sin. We're locked in to an eternal life in heaven, and then we can just go about living our lives any normal kind of way. In Sunday school this morning, for our adult classes, we're in the book of Numbers. And we were in the passage where Jesus tells this generation of Israelites, you're getting ready to take possession of the promised land, and one of the things that you have to do is drive everything else out, so that the only thing left is what's going to draw you to me. And they weren't willing to do that. They weren't really willing to pay the tough cost of what it meant to follow Jesus. Jesus is asking you, are you really sure you want to follow me? Because it's probably not what you expect. And just like marriage is many times, on some days and in some seasons, not what we expect. Right? Everybody likes the idea of starting a family, having children. And I remember distinctly, of course, I was gone for the majority of the pregnancy when James was born, and even the majority of his infancy. Right? When I was home for 2 weeks. I got home when he was a week old. I left when he was 3 weeks old. I got back from Iraq when he was about 9.5 months old. So there was a lot of real estate in those 9 months that had to be covered. But I remember this about when Tricia was pregnant with Blaine. And at about 34 weeks, 35 weeks, he started to get big enough that he was stretching out. And he would sometimes, I don't know whether it was a hand or a foot, and I don't know whether she knew. I guess she could tell. I don't know. I've never been pregnant, so it's hard for me to say. But he would have something in each of her sides of her ribs, pushing from the inside out. He was stretching out. She would say, and she would push on her stomach, and she would say, if this kid does not stop stretching out, she would push to try to get him situated. So at 36 weeks, we went to a doctor's appointment. The OB does all their stuff. They did an ultrasound. She said, hey, here's what we know. It's 36 weeks. He's fully developed. Once he comes, we're not going to stop him. And from that point on, when he would stretch out, she would say, you've got to get this thing out of me. Right? And her feet were swollen and all of these things. And why she was worried about this, I don't know. Why every pregnant woman is worried about her toenails when she can't even see her toes blows me away. Right? You have to paint my toenails. Why? Because I can't have this baby with unpainted toenails. Why? He's not looking at your toes. And I'm not looking at your toes. I don't understand why that's such a thing, right? She's like, oh, I know I got hair on my legs and my toes are funky and everything else. I'm like, nobody cares about that, dear. But she did, right? And everybody loves the thought of having a kid until your wife is yelling at you to get it out of you 37 weeks later. Or when the baby's throwing up in the middle of the night. Right? Or when they're always asking you for money. Because little babies turn into big babies. And then they want to always worry about what's for dinner. Or that they don't have gas money. Or they're giving you a hard time. And everybody likes the idea of something. But it's the sacrifice that's required to have something that makes it tough. And it's the same way with your life with Christ. Are you willing to pay the cost? Because I can promise you, and Jesus has promised you, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are hard days and hard weeks and hard seasons in store for you. And the question is not, are you willing to come to Jesus and make those things better? It's, are you willing to commit to following Jesus in spite of anything else that might happen? That's the sacrifice that Jesus wants us to make. We realize that it requires an unusual amount of sacrifice. The other thing that we see is this, is it requires unusual standards. Lord, another of his disciples said, first, let me go bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Now this is a weird one. Admittedly, this is one of the ones that unless you've probably heard this or studied this on your own, this seems like an obscure thing and we don't really know what the man is saying. And we really don't know what Jesus is saying to him in response. It's a confusing one to us. Especially when we think, okay, this guy has a legitimate request. He wants to bury his father. And aren't we commanded in the book of Exodus and throughout Scripture to honor our father and mother? So this guy seems like he's making what is a good and God-honoring request of Jesus. There are three interpretations of Jesus' response to this man's question, or what he was asking and why Jesus responded the way that he was. First, and the most natural interpretation is based on our American way of thinking, and that is this. The man's father had recently passed away and he needed to go bury him. A second interpretation is that he needed to finish the burial process. So in Jewish culture, here's what would happen. In ancient Israel, families would bury their loved ones in a cave, and then they would go back a period of time later, usually a year, give or take, and they would retrieve their bones and their remains, and then they would put them in a box called an ossuary. And then that box would go into another cave or tomb with all the other ossuaries from the family. We see this a little bit in the life of Abraham, in the life of the patriarchs, right? Where they're all buried in the same place. And what that would mean is they would be buried, they would be prepared for like burial, their bodies would be anointed and everything else, and then the family would kind of leave them alone until the decomposition was complete, and then they would gather those remains and put them in an ossuary, and then they would take that ossuary to basically a family cave or a family tomb where all. So the man could be saying, hey, I've still got a couple of months before I can go get my dad and take his bones to the family tomb. A third interpretation is that the man's father's not even dead, but he's old and sickly and dying. And in this view, the man is basically saying, I need to take care of my father until he dies. And then right after he's dead, and then I can come follow you. And you say, well, what interpretation is he talking about here, preacher? What was the man actually asking Jesus? And here's what I'm going to tell you, it doesn't matter.